Welcome in Unreal Engine for FilmMaker. In this module, you will learn how to create your first environment inside Unreal Engine. Welcome inside this new lesson of Unreal Engine for FilmMaker. In this lesson, we'll analyze the lighting, starting from the element that we insert inside our environment in the beginning. Let's start from the direct light. The direct light is the sunlight. Inside the details, we can adjust the intensity, the color, the source angle that represent the softness of our light. As you can see, if I change the softness of our sunlight, the look of the shadow is really different. In this case, I want a more soft sunlight. Okay, with the source soft angle, we can change the variation of the light on the object. We can really see this feature on metallic materials. In this case, in the external environment, I don't really see the difference, so I prefer don't touch it too much. And we can also adjust the temperature. Remember that we are changing the temperature of the color of the skylight. So in this case, the behavior of the temperature is normal because we set the skylight to white. But if you change it to purple, as you can see, the behavior is completely different. Now I will return to the default settings. Okay. Obviously, we can also change the sun position. We can do that from the transform panel in the details, changing the rotation on the Z and the Y axis. But we can also use a shortcut, Alt-L or Command-L on Mac, and change the position inside the viewport using the mouse. In this case, I want a midday sunlight. As you can see, I emphasize the light from the hole in the top of the cave. Now let's see the exponential height fog that we can call also fog, but don't think about the fog as horror fog or mystic. We can consider the exponential height fog as the density of the atmosphere. In this case, I did some adjustment in the exponential height fog, but let's set to default. Let's start from the fog density. With the fog density, we change the density of our fog. In this case, we can adjust this value from 0 to 10. From the default values is very low, but if we change to 10, as you can see, now our environment is fully covered by fog. In this case, I will setting from 0.08, something really low. We can change the fall off also. We can also create a second layer of fog. We have the same settings of the primary layer. With the in scattering color fog, we can change the color of the fog, really simple. Changing the color of the fog, we can create a more realistic look or an unrealistic look. For example, if we change to purple, we will obtain a really unrealistic look. That this could be a good solution if you wanna tell about a toxic area or something like that, or something magic. But in this case, I want to create a realistic fog, so I will change to a color that can remember the element around the fog. In this case, we have a lot of rocks, so I will try to set my fog around the orange. I can also increase the saturation. Okay. With the scatter atmosphere ambient contribution color, we can set the atmosphere color based on this value. I don't touch this value so much, but we can tweak a little bit in order to create a more cool look for our atmosphere. In this case, we can set it something from yellow in this way. Okay. We can also setting the saturation of our fog. Okay. I suggest you to be gentle with this value because change so much the fog color is not always a good idea. The last settings that I suggest you to touch for your fog is the fog opacity and the start distance, which is the distance from the camera and the first point of fog in our environment. As you can see, I can make our fog more distant from the camera or more close to our camera. Let's talk about the Scatmosphere. I don't change the Scatmosphere, but I will show you this tool. We can change the look of the atmosphere, which is the sphere around our landscape. In this case, we can change the radius, the color, and the height of our atmosphere. With the radius, obviously, we will change the radius of our sphere. Obviously, a value like 1 is really unrealistic, so I suggest you to leave the default value. With the albedo, we can change the color of our Scatmosphere. In this case, I will change a little bit and make it more darker. Just a little bit, like this. Okay. And changing the height, we can change the opacity of our Scatmosphere. Something like this. As you can see, our atmosphere becomes completely black. In this case, I will leave the default value. But as you can see, if I hide this atmosphere, I can see what is behind my atmosphere, so nothing, that is completely black. Let's talk now about the skylight. The official description of skylight is a tool that keeps the information from the environment and translate it in light data. I think that this description is not really simple to understand. I prefer make this description more easy. We can say that the skylight is a tool that create a realistic light based on the element inside our environment. We can see the effect of this tool, especially in the darkest area of our environment. In fact, if I try to deactivate the skylight, you can see what changed inside our environment. And the darkest area became less realistic. We can tweak some setting inside the skylight. The first is the real-time capture. When this option is activated, the skylight behavior will base it on the environment light, but we can deactivate it and select to specific cube map in order to give the information to our skylight based on textures. We can use this default cube map, and as you can see, the skylight behavior will be based on the texture cube that we are provided. We can also change from different texture, but in the beginning I suggest you to use the real-time capture mode. We can also change the intensity scale, but this is a really sensible value. In fact, if we try to increase this value a little bit, the environment will be very bright. In this case, I can change to 1.2 and increase a little bit the dark area. And last, we can change the color of our skylight. In this case, I suggest you to leave the default color because you will achieve the more realistic look inside your environment. Now, we can look the volumetric cloud. In the details, you can obviously change the behavior and the look of the clouds. We can change the position, the height, the distance from the ground, and the distance from the camera. In this case, I prefer leave this value to default. And we can also the density and the distance from the camera and the horizon. In this case, if I decrease this value, and as you can see now, my cloud density is really less than before. Now I will leave the default value because I don't want to touch the volumetric cloud in this case for this scenario. And now let's talk about artificial light. let's start from the point light. The point light is the most common light that we can apply inside our environment. In detail panel, we can change the intensity. In this case, we'll give a low value. We can change the unit scale of our intensity. We can change the color, obviously. We can change the attenuation radius, which is the radius of our light, simply. With the source radius, we can create another sphere inside our point light and change the fall-off from the attenuation radius. With the source soft radius, we can change the behavior of the light when impacting some element like metallic materials. As you can see now, the behavior of the light when impact this metallic material will change based on this soft source radius value. We can also create a sort of shape, in this case like a cylinder, and we can also change the temperature like the all other light. In this case, I will position my point light in this area, something like this. Okay, I will adjust a little bit. Okay, now let's talk about spotlight. The spotlight behavior is like the old spotlight in the real world. And if we see the detail panel of this spotlight are almost the same of the point light. In this case, the attenuation radius will change the maximum distance of our spotlight. We can also change the radius of this cone, and we can create an inner angle with the inner cone angle. If we increase the inner cone angle size up to the outer cone angle, obviously they will change together. And as you can see, all the other settings are the same of the point light. In this case, I don't want to use this spotlight inside my scenario, but I will position this spotlight in the top left of the cave, just to make this area a little more bright. Okay, I will tweak some settings. Okay, something like this. In this way, I expose a little bit more the darkest area on the left side of my cave. Now let's talk about rect light. We can consider a rect light like the LED panel. As you can see, the settings are almost the same, but we can also change the size of our panel, as you can see now. And we can also change the angle and the length of the door of our LED panel. Now I want to tell you how to create a flicker effect on our light. So let's copy this point light and I will position here. Okay. I will adjust the intensity and the attenuation radius. And let's change the color to red in order to give an alert look. To create a flicker look, we can create a timeline and change the value every frame. But this is not the right solution because it's a really long process and is not the more efficient way to do that. Because let's think about a timeline with 100 or 200 frames. To create a flicker look, you will change all these keyframes to create a realistic look. But we can create a specified material to create a light effect. This material is called light function, and we can also, and in your detail panel of your light, you can also find a light function material section. So let's create our light function material. Go to my materials, and as you can see, I just created a light function material. As you can see, this structure is really simple. In material domain, I set light function, and I will change only the emissive color input. So let's delete all the node and let's create this material from scratch. First, I will add a time node. Then I will create a multiply node. And I will connect the multiply input A node to the time node. And I will create a scalar parameter to control our flicker rate. So I will call my scalar parameter flicker rate. Let's set this scalar parameter to 1. And now let's add 2 new nodes, one called scene, another one called frac. Now let's connect the frac to the emissive input, and as you can see, our material now has a flicker behavior. I can obviously change our flicker rate value. Let's try with 0.5. And now you can see the change of our flicker rate. In this case, I will leave to 0.6. Let's save, close it. And in this case, I create a material instance for my light function material. And now, as you can see, our red point light is flickering. We can obviously duplicate our point light. I will position here, and I will change the intensity. Now I can add one last light. In this case is a tube light, and I will position here. So let's add a new point light inside our environment. Okay. Now let's change the intensity. In this case, I will decrease a little bit. And let's change the source length of our point light. I will change also the attention radius and the source radius. Okay. Now let's rotate a little bit. Okay, something like this. Now we need to add an object that represents the origin from our light. So let's add a cylinder. Let's scale a little bit. Okay. Something like that. Okay. And now I will apply on it a new emissive material. In this case, it's a simple surface material, and we'll tweak only the emissive color with the constant vector and the emissive power scalar parameter. Let's apply our material to our cylinder. And now that's the result. As you can see, simply adding 5 light, I create a really cool look. And I give also information about the health of this rack. For example, I know that the engine is almost okay, it's not broken, but there are other parts with the red alert that will be completely broken. We finished to talk about lighting. In the next lesson, we will finalize our environment. Welcome in Unreal Engine for filmmakers. In this module, you will learn how to create your first environment inside Unreal Engine. in this lesson we'll add our last details in our environment. As you can see, I add some more light inside my environment. 1 point light here, one here, some flickering light in the back, and this rect light here. Now I want to insert a located fog in my environment in order to see the fog coming from the hole in the top of the cave. So in the place actor, let's search local fog volume. And let positioning in the center from the ground and the hole in the cave. Something like that. Let's change the density. I will increase a little bit. Okay. Now we'll adjust the offset of our fog. Something like this. And now the fall off. I will tweak also the distribution density. Okay, and let's change the color. I want to try to search a color close to the cave look. Something like a orange pink desaturate color can be a good idea. Okay, something like that. And now we can set also an emissive for our fog. In this case, I will use a orange desaturate color. Now we give a shape to the light that comes from the hole. If you can see, if we deactivate the locked fog volume, the look is very different now. Now let's add some particles effect. If you downloaded the starter content folder when you created your environment, you can go to starter content particles. However, you can download the starter content inside your environment in add feature or content pack, content, starter content, and then add to project. Now let's add some fog, and I will use this Steamlit. Let's scale a little bit. Okay. And I will position it in the corner of my cave. Okay. Let's scale a little bit this one. Okay. Now let's add a really smoke. So drag your smoke in this area. Okay. As you can see, some particles need to be loaded, like an animation. Okay, we'll scale a little bit. Okay. Let's add another smoke in the right. And now I will add some sparks inside the engine. Let's find a good position for our spark. As you can see, this element have a really good interaction with my engine. So you can try to scale it and find your favorite solution. In this case, I prefer leave a little bit smaller than default. Okay, let's try to insert inside the engine. Okay, I found my solution. I like also how the sparks will interact with the inside of the engine. We can also add something like fire, but personally, I don't think it a really good idea because a fire inside our environment will tell about a really dangerous area. So I don't want represent my cave like a dangerous area. Now let's see a before and after of our environment with and without our particles. Let's create a new folder and let's call it particles. I prefer include also the local fog inside the particles folder. And now let's deactivate the particle folder. As you can see, the look is really better now. Obviously, we can also add more particle, more effect, but I prefer keep it simple for now because in the final of my process, I will also add my 3D cutter. The last thing I want to tell you is the decals. Decals are a specific material that work like a sticker inside our environment, like an alpha layer that we can apply wherever we want inside your environment. We can find some decals in the marketplace. Let's find graffiti. In this case, I will download the maximum quality for my decal. I accept. And now we have our different decals inside our content browser. So let's import our material. And as you can see, now we can adjust the position of this alpha layer. As you can see, this rectangle is the radius of action of our decal. We can also change the size of our rectangle. And in this case, I want to apply on this wall. So let's rotate the rectangle. Okay. Let's scale also our rectangle. Okay. I suggest you to use the unlit mode now to see better. Perfect. Let's increase our action radius. And now, as you can see, we have our decals applied to my wall. But in this case, I don't want that my decal affect also the rack of my starship. So I have to adjust the details of my rack. In the detail panel, I will search for decals and let's deactivate receive decals. As you can see now, my decals will affect only my wall. In this case, I don't want to use decals because I think it's not too realistic in this scenario. But decals is very useful because they can also create a fake physical effect on our meshes. For example, if I want to create a crack on a wall, I don't have to break the really static mesh, but I can apply different decals to create this break effect. In the same way, we apply this graffiti on our wall. Okay, now I will delete my decal. And now we are created our first environment inside Unreal. In the next lesson, we will talk about the post-process volume. Welcome in Unreal Engine for filmmakers. In this module, you will learn how to create your first environment inside Unreal Engine. Our environment is finally complete. But before to start with the animation module, we can talk about the post-process volume. We can search the post-process volume inside the place actor and drag inside our viewport. We can consider the post-process volume as a filter that we apply to our environment. First, in details, let's search for Unbound. In this way, the application of our post-processed volume will affect all the environment and not only the cube that we see now. The post-processed volume is full of settings, but we'll talk about the main that we have to know in Unreal Engine. Inside the lens section, we can setting the lenses of our cameras inside Unreal. I suggest you to deactivate the glow effect inside Unreal because we'll add in post inside DaVinci. I know that the glow effect is really cool, but it's always better control inside a composition software or inside DaVinci. Now let's talk about exposure. By default, Unreal is set to an automatic exposure. This is not a problem during the creation of our environment. When we are creating animation, we have to set our exposure to manually. So I will change the metering mode to manual, and let's change our exposure compensation for something around 10 in order to obtain the same result we had before. We can also try to push until 12 in this case. I usually change my value from 10 to 12, depending on my environment. Okay, now it's really similar than before. We will keep the chromatic aberration deactivated. We can also apply a dirt mask, but I suggest you to do that inside a composition software like Nuke or DaVinci. In this case, I don't have any dirt mask, but I never use it inside my project, especially because I don't want risks to render again my environment because I don't like the behavior of my dirt mask. In the camera settings, I can change the settings of my camera. In this case, I know that I will export in 24 FPS, so I will set a shutter speed at 50. The local exposure is a really handy tool because you can do some changes inside your environment without touching the lighting. For example, in this case, I want to decrease the intensity of the sun in the brightest area, so I can tweak the highlight contrast inside my local exposure. Let's decrease a little bit. And for my opinion, this result is a really better. We can obviously also change the shadows area. In this case, I will leave by default. And I suggest you to touch only these two values inside the local exposure. We can also control the lens flare of our cameras. I suggest you to deactivate the lens flare or keep it a really low value. If you activate it, also I suggest you to control all your camera movement and check the quality of lens flare. Sometimes I think that lens flare inside Unreal create that CGI look that personally I think is too much fake. So try to understand how to work properly with lens flare. We can also control the vignetting and the sharpness. I always keep this value at 0 because I prefer control it in DaVinci. I suggest you to keep the depth of field by default and skip it. And now we'll talk about the color grading. With the color grading tool inside the post-process volume, we can do a color grade inside Unreal Engine. Obviously, it's better to do the color grading phase inside DaVinci, but we can give a first look inside Unreal. I recommend you to don't exaggerate with all this value inside the color grading section. Let's open the global. As you can see, you can control by wheels the saturation, the contrast, the gamma, etc. for each value. So the global, the shadow, the midzone, and the highlight. Okay, let's tweak a little bit the shadow. And let's change the gamma color. As you can see now, the shadow of my environment a little bit more blue. Okay, let's change the midtones a little bit. I always recommend you to deactivate and deactivate just to understand the adjustment that we are doing inside our environment. Let's try with the gain. Okay, like this. Let's see a before and after. Okay. Personally, I think that this little adjustment can really improve my environment without really changing the look of my viewport. Now, let's talk about the film grain. Obviously, I suggest you to deactivate the film grain because it's always better control inside DaVinci or your editing software. Those was the main settings to adjust inside the post-process volume. We can also tweak the path tracing only if you are using the path tracing render. The path tracing is a alternative rendering method than the lit mode inside Unreal that is called Lumen. Now we see the viewport in Lumen, so in the lit mode, but we can change from the lit mode to the path tracing. It's important to know that the path tracing need really more power from your computer. In fact, if we activate the path tracing mode, you can see this little bar in the down area of our viewport. This is the loading of our frame. In fact, if we move inside the viewport, the loading will start again every time. I suggest you to work only in lit mode because in the last year, Unreal Engine improved really Lumen, and for the majority of cases, I think Lumen is the best solution for your renders. Also for virtual production project. And also sometimes some meshes will not appear good inside the path tracing method. That's all. Now we can start with the next lesson about the animations. In this module, you will create your first timeline and you will learn how to render your first sequence inside Unreal Engine. Okay, this is one of the last lessons of this course. We will talk about animation and how to manage camera inside our environment. For the first thing, let's add a character inside our project. I chose Cooper. You can download a project with exclusive Cooper in order to migrate inside your project. Inside this folder, we can see the animation of this character, called also animation sequences, the skeletal mesh, which correspond to the mesh, the physical asset, which control the collision of our body, and finally, the skeleton, which is simply the skeleton. So let's drag our skeletal mesh inside our environment and let's scale a little bit because this model is pretty small. Okay, 60 for me is perfect. In my idea, I want that Cooper walk inside the cave and interact with some element of the wreck. But first, I have to create my timeline. So in the top left, we can click on the check icon and create a new level sequence. I have already created a directory for my project. In this case, I will call this sequence first animation underscore tutorial. Save it. And now we can see the Unreal Engine timeline. For some aspect can be similar from the After Effects timeline. Those work a lot with keyframes and compositions. Now we have to choose the frame rate of our timeline. In this case, I will choose 24 FPS. And I will set my timeline to show me the seconds and not the frames. To add an element inside our timeline is really simple. We can simply drag it from the outliner. In this case, for Cooper, we can set the transformation or apply one of the animation sequences inside the content browser. Let's add an animation. In this case, I will choose for the walk animation. Okay. But as you can see, in this case, do a sort of moonwalk. We have to change the transform value in order to find the right match between his walk movement and his position inside the environment. Now let's rotate Cooper. We can go in rotation or change it simply by the viewport by 90 degrees. Let's set a keyframe for rotation. And now we set a fixed rotation inside the timeline. Now let's change the location value. In this case, let's create a keyframe in the first frame of our timeline and change our timeline for a second after. Now let's change Cooper. Let's create a new keyframe and let's change our keyframe interpolation in linear. In this way, we created a constant variation between our two keyframes. Okay, in this case, the variation of the position don't match at all with the walk animation. So we can try to make the walk a little bit slower. We can change the position of our keyframe. And let's try. Okay, now our keyframe variation match with the animation of Cooper. So we can create a new keyframe in order to set the end of this walk. Around here, okay, let's cancel the last keyframe. We can tweak a little bit our animation. Okay, now we have to set the first camera inside Unreal. We can go on the Place Actor in the Cinematic section and add a Cine Camera Actor. Selecting our camera, we can see a preview in the bottom right of the viewport. But we can see better our camera if we choose the camera inside the perspective mode. Okay. Now we can choose for the cinematic viewport and reselect the Cine Camera Actor. And now we can move our camera. But first, let's change some details inside the camera details panel. First, I want to change the sensor size of my camera. In this case, I will choose for DSLR sensor. Here we can change the minimum and maximum value for the focal length and the f-stop, and also set the D-squeeze value in order to have an anamorphic look, and change the blade count of our bokeh. I usually don't change this value at all. I keep it at 7, it's perfect. Now we can change our focus method. We can choose between a full focus image or also between a manual focus or tracking focus method, picking our character. In the manual focus, I can set the distance from the camera and the focus plane. But in this case, I need to activate a preview of my focus plane position, clicking on Show Debug Focus Plane. As you can see, we have this purple plane in front of our camera. And with this method, we can understand better the position of our focus plane. We can tweak the look of our focus plane, obviously. In this case, I want keep in focus the end of my cave. Okay, like this. We can also crop our sensor if you want a television look or a more cinematic look with this black barn. And we can change the squeeze factor in this case and have a anamorphic look. In this case, I will use a 50 millimeter. Okay. And we can change the aperture of our lens. As you can see, if we change the aperture, we change also the exposure inside our lens because we set a manual exposition inside our post-process. In this case, 2.8 is perfect. Let's close. And here we can find the same settings of the post-process volume. That's because we can override the post-process settings inside the camera. In this way, the camera will have a different look than the post-process we set it before. I recommend you to keep the post-process look the same for all the camera. So personally, I don't like to change the color of the cameras, but sometimes I tweak manually the exposure of each camera based on the aperture. Now let's drag our Cine Camera Actor inside the timeline. And as you can see, now we have a lot of settings based on Cine Camera Actor. Also, when I import a camera inside my timeline, I can see the camera cut, which represents the camera that I choose to render in that specific moment of the timeline. In this case, I will render the camera 1. Let's change the position of our camera and let's set a keyframe on here. Okay. Let's set a keyframe in the transform. And let's change the position around on the 3rd second of our render. Okay. Something like this, just to introduce the character and the environment. Okay, I think that this movement is really too fast, so we'll make a little bit slower. Okay, I will increase the duration of the animation. Perfect. Now I want to introduce a new camera that look in front of my character. So let's create a new camera. I can also duplicate my camera inside the outliner. And now let's choose our new camera in the perspective panel. Okay, let's change the position and let's make our camera look our character. Okay. In this case, I can change the focus method from manually to tracking. So let's find the focus settings and change to tracking. I will pick my character. Okay. As you can see, even my character is walking in the environment, the focus track is positioned. Now I want that my camera movement follow the same movement of our character. To do that, I can create a keyframe inside my viewport, but I can also do another method that I think is more efficient and more simply. What I want to do is anchor my camera to my character. In that way, every movement of my character will be the same of my camera. So let's drag our camera inside the timeline. Now let's click on this plus icon and search for attach and choose Cooper. Choose the bone of Cooper. In this case, I will choose none because I don't want to attach my camera to a specific component of the skeleton of my character. And as you can see now, the camera will move to a randomic place. What we have to do is simply, we can go on the camera details and on the transform positions. Now let's set by default the transformation of our camera. And as you can see, our camera will appear really close to Cooper. So let's repositioning our camera as before. More close. Okay, okay. Perfect. Let's change the focal length. I will try with 35 millimeters. And as you can see now, our camera is moving based on Cooper movement. Now I want to expand the Cooper walk, but before I want to also add a new camera inside the camera cut. Specifically, I want to add the Cine Camera Hector 2 inside my render. So I can press on the plus icon on the camera cuts and choose Cine Camera Hector 2. From this second, my Cine Camera Hector 2 will be rendered inside my timeline. Now let's close our Cine Camera Hector 1 and 2 and let's expand our Cooper walk. First, let's match our walk animation with the keyframes. Duration, okay, like that. And now clicking on our animation bar and pressing Alt, we can move and duplicate our animation. Now I suggest you to match the position of our camera switch inside the camera cut with the restart point of our walk animation. The walk of Cooper is not a really perfect loop, so changing the camera when we restart the animation is the best solution to don't see any lag during the animation. As you can see, there is a little bit of lag, but changing the camera, we will not see anything. Now we have to create a new keyframe that match the exactly same speed of the Cooper walk. The smart way to recreate the same speed animation is do a simple math calculation, checking the difference between the first and the last keyframe of our X inside our location transform. In this case, 3559 less 3323, which is 236. So let's jump to the second 10 and add 236 to our X value. But in order to see properly our camera, we have to expand the anchor between our camera and our Cooper movement. So let's expand this bar. And as you can see now, the speed of Cooper walk, it not change at all. So we can delete our middle keyframes and we will maintain a smooth walk of our character. So now let's expand the ending point of our timeline, which is this red line. And we can also change the duration of our camera inside the camera cut. And now we can create a new camera inside our environment. In this case, I want to create a new camera in this exact position in order to see in focus this engine in front of me, and after change the focus plane, close the flicker light. So let's add a new camera from the place actor. But as you can see, if we try to replicate our viewport position simply dragging our camera inside the viewport is almost impossible. We can do that with two single click. In the outliner, right click on our new camera and click on Snap Object to View. Now our new camera have the same view of our viewport. We have to fix the camera settings. Let's change DSLR, crop to cinematic crop, discrete factor to 2. And now we have the same settings of the older camera. Now let's setting the focus plane close to our camera. We can also use the picker tool to select the position of our focus plane. And now we can add our camera inside the sequencer. We can create also a new camera cut. Perfect. And now let's animate the focus distance inside our sequencer. We need simply create a new keyframe and choose the timeline position of our new keyframe to set our focus distance. Now let's change We can also use the focus plane to help us a little bit. Okay, that's perfect. We can deactivate it. And now we create a smooth focus change. Now I want to create an interaction between Cooper and our of the meshes inside my environment. I will choose this electrical panel. It's not pretty good, but I don't want to show directly inside my render. Obviously, I don't want to create a new animation for this interaction. I can choose the best animation inside my content browser. But before, we have to change the Cooper position inside our environment. To do that, I can use the same character and create a specific transform in my sequencer. So we can click on the plus on Cooper transform inside the sequencer and choose additive. In this way, we can create a new animation layer for our character. Now to change the Cooper position suddenly without any animation, we have to set the current position of Cooper and change the interpolation mode to constant. Now we have to choose when we want to change the Cooper position. For example, here. And let's create a new constant keyframe. We have to move Cooper, obviously. Let's fix a little bit the position. And let's confirm our new keyframe. Now I want to fix the size between Cooper and the electrical panel. So I will change also the Cooper position. I think it's better here. And we change the panel position and we scale a little bit. Something like this is okay. Okay. This is really more realistic now. We can change also Cooper position and update his constant keyframe. Now we can add a new animation for Cooper. In this case, I will choose for serving. In this case, this animation will rotate the Cooper, so I don't have to rotate manually. As you can see, it's like Cooper is working on this panel in order to repair the starship. Now we can add new cameras inside our environment. But first, remember to expand the addictive transform inside your sequencer. And now we can add a new camera. In this case, I can also duplicate the last camera that I created in my project. Let's choose inside the viewport our new camera. And now I want to position my camera here. Okay. Obviously, we have to adjust the focus. In this case, I will use the tracking method. But using the picker, as you can see, there is a layer of the smoke in front of Cooper. In this case, I can also choose my character, moving the camera, or select Cooper directly from the details. Let's change our focus length. Okay. Let's pick the position and add our new camera inside the sequencer. And obviously, update also the camera cut. And from this new camera, we can see Cooper that is working on this electric panel. We can decide to stop our new camera around here and create a new camera that will close our little sequence. So let's duplicate the first camera in this case because I want to insert a master inside my sequence. And let's change the viewport based on our new camera. Okay. what I want to do is a simple dolly out of my camera. Let's add the camera inside the sequencer and update the camera cut. Okay. And now let's set the last keyframe of our new camera. Around here is perfect. Okay, let's see the result. It's okay, but I prefer to change the interpolation between the keyframes. In this case, I want to change the start keyframe and set the interpolation to linear in order to have a straight animation in the beginning and a more smooth and curved animation in the conclusion of my camera movement. In this case, because it's the last camera of our sequence, I suggest you also to make it a little bit longer in order to add a dissolve animation during the editing phase. And setting the position of this red line, we can choose the final frame of our render. Now let's see all the camera that we created in this lesson. So we have an introducing camera that will introduce the character and the environment. A closer look to our character, which is moving inside the cave. Some details of the starship components, which can also see the flicker of one of the red point light. In this camera, we can see Cooper, which is working inside this electronic panel. And finally, we have our master camera, which show us the entire environment that we show in the beginning. I can also change a little bit the duration of this camera movement. Now we have all our camera animation. In the next lesson, I will show you how to render properly all this camera inside the Movie Render Queue.